There's an African proverb that states it takes a village to raise a child. And I actually would contend that it also takes a village to make a CX program work. Often what you find is within a CX program that you are working along similar to the story of the 6 blind men and the elephant. If you're not familiar with this story, it essentially goes that there were 6 blind men who were placed at different places on top of around the elephant, and each one, based on where they were, had an experience in what they thought the elephant was. So without going through all 6 of those, really one had touched the tusk and thought that it was a spear, another touched the tail and thought that it meant it was like a rope. Well, in CX, don't we all kind of come in with our own sorts of expectations and thought processes around what it is that the customer wants, as well as what they need, when the reality is we need someone like they had, which was a Raja, to say, hey, it's not all these individual things. Really what it is an elephant is nothing but a big animal. So CX is also a big animal. So my contention today is to think a little bit about what it means to have a full-blown CX program where you are actually working towards the same thing together. So the first thing that I would suggest is that in order to make a CX program work, you really have to start by having a commitment. And commitment starts off very much the same way, where you understand that there's something that's going on, you get your team to engage. But in the middle, it gets a little wacky, it gets a little muddy from the standpoint of, are your team members really engaged with the process? And so what I would say is, it really comes down to, do they trust you? Do they trust your leadership? Do they trust your organization? If they do, ultimately what you get is you can get that commitment to change because hopefully they are being brought into the process. They're having an opportunity to have an opinion and being able to really help make those decisions. Whereas if they're not and they don't trust you, then the best you can ever hope for is compliance. And nobody wants people to just think about things in terms of, I'm complying with the situation versus I'm really engaged, invested, and feel like it really matters. So let me walk you through some examples. This first example is about thinking about building and implementing a CX strategy and a roadmap. This particular client was one that was facing some legislative changes, and as a result of those legislative changes, needed to refocus on how they thought about their strategy. And what they did was typically what happens, you start off with mapping your customer journey, but they didn't stop there. We worked with them to say, in addition to just thinking about your customers, you really also need to think about where do the employees fit into this process, as well as where do your providers, your partners, your suppliers fit in as well. And through that, it didn't just identify what are the gaps in between those particular silos, but also where it comes, those gaps may exist from the standpoint of the other partners that come into play. As a result of this work, they built out their multi-year roadmap with us, and also were able to say, how is it that we get our teams to continue to work together and identify what are those innovations that we can think about going forward so that we are not just delivering a good experience for ourselves internally, for our customers, but also for our partners. So some takeaways really are just around making sure that you are thinking about your culture and not just your customers. Also move beyond, again, the customer journey and think about what are those other journeys that play a role, and bringing and inspiring and encouraging to bring what you can around your customers to life. So this is an example of a customer room as a part of that process. My second example is really still about bringing customers into the conversation. For this particular client, they were facing working in a deregulated industry. And as a result of that, their competition was continuing to change. And the work that we did with them was very foundational from the standpoint they hadn't really worked or focused in on CX at that point. So we were able to, again, look at doing a customer journey map with them, but also as a part of those particular workshops with their employees, it was also a matter of saying, we've got employees who work in this particular silo or particular business unit over here, and they've never had an opportunity to work with this person over here. So how do we now bring them together, give them the opportunity to have conversations with one another? And as a result, they found there's some things that happen upstream as well as downstream in the process that we didn't even realize were causing problems, not just internally, but for our customers as well. And we want our customers to say, so how do we start to think about how we change that? So bring your employees into the conversation and really make sure that they are not just being heard as a checkbox, but really making sure that they are being heard from the standpoint of being able to add to the conversation, help you innovate. And that's what this particular team did. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. They also found that there really are some internal subject matter experts that they had been overlooking. So your employees are a wealth of knowledge as much as your customers are. A lot of times they will round out that story for you in ways that you hadn't even thought about. With that same client, they took this as an opportunity to think about doing their CX Governance Council. And what's important about a CX Governance Council is you got to have a stakeholder. If you have a stakeholder, then that's the person who will lead that charge, but also there are all these other layers. Every organization, depending upon your size, isn't going to have all of that, but there are things that happen at each of these levels. So you've got your owner, the person who's helping to make sure that there are resources and people attached to it. Your CX Leadership Council is really all about your key stakeholders across business units. They're helping to also make sure that you're getting some money. Your CX Council are the ones who think about what are the priorities, what are the things that are on our roadmap, how do we want to go forward versus where we are today, what's our vision for 10 years or 5 years down the road, and how do we start thinking about getting there. Your CX Operations Council, which is one I think that a lot of people don't talk about, but how is it really embedded in all of those various silos and making sure that those resources and people who can help you bring it to life, making sure that they are held accountable. It's one thing to be given a task, it's another thing to be held accountable for it. And then finally, I call the project teams the boots on the ground. They're the ones who are really making sure that the work is being done. And then finally, you have your CX Champion program, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. But this is all beyond just gathering your CX and your EX information across the organization. One other thing is, in each of these levels, you should also be thinking about where does your user experience fit in, as well as your digital experience. They often get overlooked, and they are just as important to making sure that you're driving things forward to the future. So I mentioned I would come back to the CX Champion program. This same client decided, we're kind of scrappy, we don't have everything figured out, let us do a CX Champion program. And CX Champion programs are wonderful tools from the standpoint of they get the opportunity to hear from their other coworkers what's going on, the opportunity to hear what the customers are saying, what the partners are saying, and being able to bring it back in a way that often the information ends up on your roadmap and how you're thinking about the future. They are the ones who can give you more information or information that is equal to what you're getting from your customers in a very tactile way. So some tips around a CX Champion, it really helps your employees understand that you're invested in them. It helps to build that deeper relationship. It also inspires cross collaboration between teams. It allows you to develop these champions in very different places around your organization. And it's, again, a great resource in order to close the loop or add additional context to what your customers are telling you. So really, the process really, in this case, is thinking about how you prepare to have some folks who can participate in that. A lot of times people will raise their hands and say, yes, I'm all in, sign me up, and others will not. Create it and implement it. And then keep on changing as it works for your organization when you find that things aren't necessarily always on point. So in conclusion, hopefully you've had some little tips around how you make your program a connected experience. Make sure you're getting a commitment to change and that really people are really committed to that and not just complying. Build your strategy by considering all parts of the customer experience as well as that of the experience of your partners and providers. Bring your employees into the conversation. You never know what it is that they may tell you. And start a CX Champion program, and hopefully you too can have a full operational village. In conclusion, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. Thank you.